All right, guys, we are going to talk about wants versus needs when talking about characterization. So, what you've always learned is there's characters, and then there's a plot, and then there's a theme and an ending. But there's kind of a lot of things that go in between that make characters a little bit more complex. So, we like to call it wants versus needs. So, a want is what the character's goal is. So it's like, what are they wanting to achieve? So the character's want usually drives the plot, whereas their need is what they don't really understand, right? The need is realized over the course of the story. So the protagonist goes through some stuff first, and this character's need changes them. So let me give you a quick example. If you've ever watched the movie Cars, right, with Lightning McQueen, his goal is to win the Piston Cup, right? He wants to be the youngest person to win the Piston Cup. And, he goes through all of these things. He's trying to get there, and then he gets derailed and gets lost in Radiator Springs. And while he's in Radiator Springs, he messes up the road and he needs to fix it before he can leave. And while he's doing that, his want is driving the plot. He's doing these things to get to the Piston Cup, but he realizes while going through some stuff that he's changing, and he realizes his need isn't as important as he originally thought, or his want is the Piston Cup isn't originally as important as he thought. His need is he wants connection. He wants friends. And that's what changes him. So we're going to continue with the Shrek example because I think Shrek is a really great way to kind of break down wants versus needs. So we talked about last class that Shrek's want is very clear. He wants to be left alone in his swamp. But that is what is put into the conflict, right? Like Lord Farquaad enacts a law that sends all the fairy tale creatures into his swamp, right? He outlaws them. So this is a classic inciting event. So this is what Mrs. Moore talks about, is there's an event that changes the course of action, right? So is when he enacts a law that sends all the creatures into the swamp. And Shrek does not like this. He wants to be alone, right? That's his want. He wants to be alone, and now he has all these people invading his space. So the whole plot is he needs to fetch Fiona to get Farquaad to fetch Fiona and give her to Farquaad to get his swamp and solitude back, right? It's very simple. But his need, when we get to his need, is Shrek doesn't really understand what his actual need is. Most of the time they don't. What he needs is slipped into the background because he doesn't really realize that being alone isn't what is going to make him happy. Nor does he realize that what he wants is actually opposite of what he needs, is to be left alone, which is his want, versus his need is to be accepted and find connection. So his need is woven through the plot while trying to get his swamp back. He makes friends on his journey who accept him for who he is, not just in spite of him being an ogre. And again, I want to bring home that the protagonist almost always does not know what they need, which is why needs don't drive plots very well. That's why it's usually about a want, and throughout the story they realize their need. So yeah, that's kind of where we are at, and make sure that after you finish all of your notes, you now get your second note page.